Welcome to Off the Page, the show where we talk with Colorado authors to get the story behind the story. I'm Stacy McKenzie, a librarian here at Mamie Dowd Eisenhower Public Library in Broomfield. And today we have Stan Moore. Now, he's been on the show before, but today he's here with his new book, Mr. Moffat's Road. Stan, thank you so much for coming and visiting today.
My pleasure. Happy to be here, Stacy.
So happy to have you back with your wonderful new book. Before we talk about your most recent book, I'd like to remind everybody what you talked about with us the first time you came. You had Seesaw and Over the Dam last time. Tell us a little bit about the book Seesaw.
Seesaw was my first book. It's a straight history book. It's an in-depth look at November 1942, which was really the crux month of World War II, from the time that the Axis was winning pretty much everything that they tried to. The Allies turned the tide, started to roll them back towards Berlin and Tokyo. I look at 5 specific campaigns. I've got some letters and diaries of some men who were in those campaigns. It's a in-depth look at what was happening around the world. Very important time and really shaped the rest of the century, in my opinion.
Really interesting how you looked at such a very specific time and just drew out from that, and also with, like you said, some personal stories from people.
Yeah, that really added a lot to it. I mean, a letter from a man in New Guinea talking about what was going on, or Guadalcanal. It was eye-opening, even though I'd read and studied a lot about this, the things that they actually had to say.
It's a really well put together analysis of that year and that time.
I enjoyed the research of it very much, and looking at that particular, and it's called Seesaw because it really was a turning point in history. And it was a close run thing, and a lot of places, a few thousand men or a couple of planes in a different spot. We could well be speaking German, or the Pacific would be a Japanese lake. So.
I remember that being a really in-depth interview because, not being a history buff, it was just so interesting to hear about all these details and how things could have gone very differently.
Yes.
We also talked about your other book, Over the Dam. Quite different from Seesaw. Tell us about Over the Dam.
180 degrees different. Over the Dam is a novel, a pure novel set in present-day Colorado about eco-terrorists and water. So it's a look at, well, what could happen, I suppose, but it's kind of a thriller, and examines, you know, what do you do if you think something's going wrong? How far should you go to stop what you consider a bad thing?
And quite hot topics you bring together there, water and Colorado.
Yes.
Is that what inspired you for this, possibly?
Well, yes. It's again, that's one of those node or nubbins of history that we only have so much water to go around here, and we're frankly using it here in Colorado faster than it's available.
Yeah.
And sooner or later, we're going to have to come to grips with that. I don't know if I'll live to see it or not, but there's only so much water. So.
Very, very hot topic. So before we actually talk about your latest work, Stan, when you're not writing, what are you doing here in Colorado?
I spend a lot of time outdoors. I lead trips for the Colorado Mountain Club. I like to hike and snowshoe. I don't ski so much anymore. Backpack, do a lot of backpacking. Spend a lot of time just reading and investigating history. I love to find little niche sites where, especially in Colorado, where little historical things happen that, you know, you've heard about or read about. Go visit them, that kind of a thing. Plus, I spend a lot of time with family. I have a son and his wife here in the Denver area. They have 2 young children and a daughter out of state with a young son. So we see them a fair amount as well.
You keep busy.
Yes.
Your connection with hiking and being outdoors and history reminds me of your latest book, Mr. Moffat's Railroad. Talk a little bit about Mr. Moffat's Railroad. Again, quite a different book than you've written before.
Yes, Mr. Moffat's Road is a historical novel. It's the story of the early building of the Moffat Road, the railroad from Denver that was aimed for Salt Lake City. It goes through the Moffat Tunnel now, named for David Moffat, who ramrodded the entire project. but it's a historical novel. So the basics of the story really happened. The big names really said and did the kinds of things they did. Of course, some of the characters are made up to, I mean, it's a novel in that way, but it's a true representation of what happened from 1902 to about 1904 here in Colorado around the building of that road.
So about how much is fiction in it versus the real story? If someone is really interested in this topic, what can they expect?
Well, the upper story is fact. The lower story is, many of the characters are fictional, but the kinds of things that they had to do, the way you couldn't get from here to there without getting in Shank's mare or getting on a horse, that's all factual. One of the inspirations for this story is that I have a family connection to all this.
Oh, okay.
My great-grandparents had a contract to provide one of the construction camps with meat and produce. They settled the ranch near El Dorado Springs. It's still in the family, but from that they actually would load up meat, dairy products, vegetables, and take it up to one of the construction camps. So we have a lot of diaries and family lore around that, and I've heard about that since I was just a little kid. So that was kind of part of it as well.
Oh, wow, a connection. That's always going to be a nice way to get into a story.
Yeah, they make a cameo in the book.
Excellent.
Great-grandparents do, but in that sense, that's factual. But
So some of the real characters, not the made-up ones.
Yes.
Now, you mentioned David Moffat. He's basically the main character of your story. Give us a little background on him.
David Moffat was a young man born in New York State, 1839, I believe. Came west to Omaha in the 1850s. Came to Denver in 1861. Was a businessman. Ended up with First National Bank as an officer shortly. Rose to be president of First National Bank, and as such, he invested heavily in Colorado, mines, other banks, merchandising. He owned the bulk of the Denver Union Water Company, the Denver Tramway Company. He was one of the moving of the city fathers who established a railway from Denver to Cheyenne in 1872, so Denver would be on the national grid because it was isolated up until then. Very much a civic-minded, honest, fair businessman. You hear about the robber barons in those days, and many of them were boy, you don't turn your back. Rockefeller and Jay Gould and E.H. Harriman, people like that. David Moffat did very well, but he was an honest man. He treated his people well and fairly. Was very involved throughout Colorado. He was president of the Denver and Rio Grande Western Railroad for a while. Okay. Extended it throughout a lot of different places. Story about that is he wanted to build a 9-mile spur from the main line into the town of Creede, Colorado, which was a big silver mining camp at that time. He owned some mines there, but he said we can make a ton of money hauling goods in or out, 9 miles, let's do it. The Rio Grande board would not. He finally resigned from the board, built the road, made a ton of money hauling his own ore out, and then sold the road to the Denver and Rio Grande Western at a profit. So he was that kind of, he had a knack for knowing the opportunities and being there at the right time. But he was, like I said, an honest man. At some point he decided he wanted to build a railroad to Salt Lake City. Now if you look at the railroads, you look at the Indian trails, the wagon roads after that, the highways after that, they all follow pretty much the same path of least resistance, as it were. They come up the river valleys and so forth. David Moffat wanted to build a road, a standard gauge railroad to Salt Lake City, and he wanted to punch it straight through the mountains. He didn't care about path of least resistance or going up the creek beds or anything like this. And that's pretty much what he did, as long as his money lasted. If you look at where the road goes, it's the road that goes, or the train that goes, the ski train that goes to Winter Park through the Moffat Tunnel and then on down to towards Glenwood or up towards Steamboat. But goes along the face of El Dorado Mountain with big cliffs every couple of hundred yards, and they had to build 30-some tunnels to get through that.
How do you even build a tunnel?
Well, you know, that's a remarkable story when you think about it, because this was 1900.
Yeah, dynamite, right?
Well, dynamite was pretty new. They were still using nitroglycerin some. Dynamite had just really gotten on the scene, which was much safer than nitroglycerin, much more stable. Although today you'd think of dynamite as it's much better than it was. But they would start from either end. I mean, literally, two men, one holding a drill, another hitting it with a sledgehammer. The guy holding the drill would turn it a quarter turn, hit it again, drill a hole into the rock, put dynamite in, boom. But they started at both ends, and every one of those tunnels, every one of those 30-some tunnels came in within an inch or two of each other on center and on grade. And we didn't have GPS, we didn't have computers, we didn't have CAD/CAM. That was all paper and pencil and line of sight surveying.
And a little luck, maybe?
Well, you know, some, yes,
sure,
no doubt. I mean, but a lot of that you made your own.
Yeah.
You made your own.
Wow.
There were not even that many cave-ins. I mean, the geology was determined to be safe, and that was the second or third attempt to put a railroad up through that general route, though. 1880, there was a route called the Denver-Utah Pacific that cut some grade and up through there, much lower than the Moffett Road goes now. But that was the thinking, we'll go up here and do this, and they just started too low. They never laid a rail. They were like many railroads of the time that would float bonds and raise money, but a little bit like the dot-com companies in 1998.
Yeah.
They were raising money, they were mining investors as much as actually going to build the railroad or going to build the dot-com company.
So what's left of the Moffett project now? Road and railroad and tunnels?
Oh yeah, it you know, the coal trains you see coming down through Colorado, through Denver every day, going to comes down the Moffett Road from Craig. Comes
still
down.
works.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. It's the same grade, other than what went up and over Rollins Pass over the Continental Divide, but it's the same grade. It's been improved and not even widened that much. Stabilized in a few places. A few of the tunnels were cut out and made just you know, pass-throughs.
Yeah.
But it's the same thing that was surveyed and built in 1902 to 1904.
That's marvelous Colorado history right there.
It shaped the state. I mean, not only David Moffett's Moffett Road, the going out to northwest Colorado, it never went past Craig. He ran out of money and couldn't get any. There's a story behind that we'll get to.
Oh, okay.
But you know, the railroads went everywhere in the state from 1872 or so until about 1900. I mean, all the little towns up on the west side of South Park, Crested Butte, Gunnison, Creed, Lake City, Telluride, Georgetown, Netherland, Walden, every one of those had a railroad going in.
And there's such a better story there than some of the other parts of the country and railroads because of the mountains, because of the minerals and stuff that they were trying to get to.
Mm-hmm.
That's just amazing.
Yeah, a lot of those railroads were, I mentioned the Moffett Road was standard gauge. Most of the railroads that went into the mountains were narrow gauge, 36-inch width, because cheaper to build, cheaper to run, and you can take tighter turns and climb steeper grades. So of course it's ideal for going into Telluride or up past Georgetown or what have you. By the way, do you know where the standard grade came from, the 4 foot 8.5 inch? That originated with Roman chariots.
Oh.
That's the width
We're
the Romans
going way
built their
back
roads.
now, huh?
Wagons built the roads the same, and trains did that.
Wow. What's that measurement?
4 foot 8.5 inches.
4 foot 8.5
That's the
inches.
standard gauge. That's what you'll see up there on
I don't think I'll ever
Moffett.
look at a mountain tunnel or a railroad the same way again.
Talk about history and
It's
looking
really
back
amazing.
down the times.
That's really amazing.
Yeah.
How did you do all of the research for this? How did you find your best bits of information?
Well, part of it is I grew up my father was a railroad nut. One of my early memories is riding the back of a Jeep somewhere, I think it was on Rollins Pass somewhere, jogging along railroad ties on an abandoned railroad. So he was always going, poking, looking for old things like that as well. A lot of books, talking to a lot of different people, again, family diaries and things like that as well. That's basically it.
Yeah. And what about for just putting a book together and writing a book as a piece, regardless of what it's about, really? That's quite something to take on. Where did you get help for just formulating a book?
Well, at least at the start, I'd been threatening to write a book for quite a while. My wife finally said one day, "Well, why don't you?" In other words, put up or shut up, right?
Yeah, good.
So I thought, well, I think I will. And I just started, as I'd always had an interest in World War II as well, so I started writing on Seesaw, and I knew some of my friends' fathers had been in those. So I talked with them and got permission to use the diaries and things. That's one of those things, like so many things in life, if you know what you're getting into at the start, if you knew now what you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, you've learned along the way.
Yeah. If you knew, if I'd known at the start, it would have been much more daunting. You just keep, write down. A friend of mine, though, said, get it out on paper. The first time, just get it out. You'll have to go back and tweak it and rewrite it and discard part of it and work on it and be discouraged and start over. But if you don't get it out and get it started, nothing will happen. So that was really good advice.
That was good advice.
The first time, just get it out, and you go back and look at it in a week, and think, needs a lot of work here.
And then you did the first one, and then the second one.
Yes.
And now the third one.
Yes.
And you mentioned your wife,
yes,
Catherine. What did she do for you on this book?
She did the cover art, actually on all three books.
I didn't know that. Oh,
Yes,
that's wonderful.
she did. Yeah. Of course, Seesaw is just that. That's an interpretation of a lake, the lake in the story,
Right.
on over the dam. And this is on Mr. Moffat's Road. This is actually her interpretation of a train coming along the face of El Dorado Mountain.
That's wonderful. It's really nice that she helped you with that.
She really enjoys that.
All the family.
art. Yeah.
Yeah, that's marvelous.
Yes, does a good job with that.
Stan, historical fiction is so popular. Why do you think people love historical fiction so much instead of just reading a textbook or something?
Let me answer that by saying I really enjoyed writing it because I like history, and writing a novel is a lot of fun. The characters can kind of take over. But this melds the two, because if a good work of historical fiction will really give a sense of time and place and what was really happening. History isn't just dates and dead people and battles.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what many people learn in school, and it's too bad because it's really fascinating. It's when people and events come together at certain places, what history is. In this case, you had David Moffat determined to build this railroad. You had financiers back east who did not want him to, who were throwing all kinds of roadblocks in his way to try to stop him. And you had people day to day who were happy to have a job and were doing whatever they could to help build this railroad. So it takes a time in Colorado, which was very important and dynamic, and puts a human face on it. That's what I was trying to do anyway.
Yeah. So that's why people might want to read a story about what really happened, but not just read a textbook on it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, because that's what I do here. I mean, all of the major things in this book really happened. They truly did. But this isn't just 2 inches in an encyclopedia or on Wikipedia saying, well, this date this happened and that happened. This goes into depth, and there's some emotion. And my great uncle was a surveyor on that road, and he actually died during the process.
Wow.
And I'm sure other people did. It wasn't like the poor Chinese coming through the Sierra on the Central Pacific, where they died almost by the boatload. But some people did die in the building of this.
Sure. It's not an easy job.
No. And there was certainly no OSHA or workers' comp or anything like that in those days. So, I mean, if you could, you went to work, and you hoped that you lived to die in bed someday.
Yeah. And I love all of the personal connections with you that you have with the book. That family was involved with building one of the camps, and that you actually have an uncle who worked on the actual railroad itself. That had to be extra fun for you to put those parts of it in there.
It was. It was good background. I mean, because I said I heard stories about this from the time I was a kid, but it was fun to step back a little bit and think about what they would have really been doing, and how they actually fulfilled some of the things, the contracts that they had in this, and the way they went about it. It kind of gave me a new appreciation for what they went through.
Yeah.
Plus, just looking at the way they had to live. I mean, to them it was state of the art and it was great. You look back and 2 hours to get from El Dorado Springs to Boulder, and that was a quick trip.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we so much take for granted our ease of life today.
Yeah. True. Yeah.
But that's, again, what the book is about, because the railroads really opened up, created improved standards of living and improved the economy, and really just made a lot of the country that we have today.
I think we take them for granted now, railroads, as like sort of noisy nuisances that, you know, if one runs around your neighborhood or you get stopped in traffic, but they're really the foundation of what it of everything,
Yes.
of how everything got to where everything was.
The only way that you could get around at any time. You know, you think back 1870, all of a sudden you can go from New York City to San Francisco in a week. And that was, man, this is, you know, buckle your seatbelt. It was, at the time,
Yeah.
it was really fast.
That's crazy.
Now, what do you mean a week? You know,
Just a week.
I could do it in 6 hours.
Exactly.
You know,
Amazing.
but it's all in the context and the times. Plus, I mean, the railroads. I mean, think about it. The cattle drives would come up from Texas to Kansas, and they'd ship these cattle back east. That improved the nutrition of people back east.
Yeah.
The economy, improved the ranchers out here. I mean, it just opened up the country out here.
It was everything.
I mean, and that's just one example of how the railroads and all the mines in Colorado, all these little mining towns, and the railroads that took goods in and brought the ore out.
They were excited when the railroad came
Oh
that
yeah,
day,
that was
when the train was coming
a big
in.
day. I gave a talk to a community group a couple of weeks ago, and a woman came up afterwards and said, well, I grew up in La Junta back in the 20s and 30s, an older woman. And she said, that was on the main line from LA to the East Coast, and twice a week the train would stop and the movie stars would get out. She said that was our entertainment. We'd go down and get autographs, you know. So
Never even thought of that either.
no,
That's
you know,
wonderful.
I had never, you know, but that was an artery. It still is to a degree for transit.
Well, and then, you know, when you said that, I just remembered that presidential campaigns, they used to get on the back of them and go across the
whistle stop
country.
tours, yeah.
That's
Yeah,
amazing.
that's right.
We don't have anything like that anymore. do
No,
we?
no, we don't.
Wow, Stan, this is just such a great book. Who would you say is the best audience for this book?
Anyone interested in Colorado history, anyone interested in what life was like for just regular people in early 1900s here on the edge of the frontier, and a railroad bus as well.
Yeah.
There's some technical railroad talk in there. I have a couple of guys talking that as well. But I would say anybody interested in what life was like, whatever aspect of it.
I would agree, and I think it sounds great for all ages.
I would say yes,
yeah.
all ages. 15, you know, a kid in junior high school even would say, "Oh, gosh, you know, you couldn't. They didn't have internet in those days."
Not
know.
even close.
You know, that's right. But I mean, it's a good picture of for anybody who's interested in what life was like.
Yeah, I agree. I'm excited for people to read it. Well, before you go, I have to ask you, what's your next project? You've got 3 wonderful books here. What are you writing next?
I'm working on another railroad book. Mr. Moffat's Road takes the road up to the base of the Continental Divide in 1904. They're just thinking about, okay, we've got to build a road up and over the Continental Divide, use it for a couple of years while we drive a tunnel through. That'll take 3 or 4 years. It didn't work out that way. But I'm working on a book that looks at how they dealt with those problems, and working in some other things as well.
Wonderful. So a kind of a sequel to
Yes, it's a
Mr.
sequel, yeah,
Moffat's Road.
continuation of this story.
And more railroads, more
Yes,
about that,
railroads,
and more Colorado history.
More, yeah, early developments in Colorado. Not only the railroads, but some mining and things like that. So.
Oh, that's great. I always like to ask authors about some help that they've gotten in actually getting their book published. Tell me a little bit about your involvement with Colorado Authors League.
Well, Colorado Authors League is the oldest authors group in Colorado, formed in, I want to say 1935, mid-30s. We are all about helping authors be authors, whether it's improving the craft, or networking, or marketing, just helping authors be authors in a lot of different ways. So it's a fine organization. We have a lot of interesting things going on.
That's wonderful. And I know you're doing some special things with them. People can go to the Colorado Authors League website and get some more information.
Yes.
Love
So,
that.
that's a website you can look up specs on any author who's a member.
Oh, wonderful. And I'm sure there's a bunch of them there.
Yes, there are.
We'll be having some of them on soon, I'm sure.
Sounds good.
Stan, thank you so much for coming back on the show and sharing your book, giving us a refresher on the other two great books that you've got.
My pleasure.
Just a really great history lesson in a lot of ways, but in an entertaining way. So thanks
thank
again.
You. My pleasure.
You bet.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank Stan Moore for being on the show today with his book, Mr. Moffat's Road. And check your local library for all of the books that we talked about on today's show. And join us for more next time on Off the Page.